Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode. And once again, we're here with Nelson Bopp, and he's got a very interesting presentation on the Exodus. So, with that, Nelson, I'll let you take it over.
Okay, so you're going to have a lot of people nowadays saying that the Exodus is, as recorded in the Bible, is not really historical, and that it's just a compilation of various myths and, I guess, narratives of oral tradition that were passed down. But I'm going to present some evidence to the contrary. So, what people now are claiming is that, like, when the Israelites were in captivity in Babylon, they kind of just compiled this and put it all together. But a study called Onomastics of the Exodus Generation in the Book of Exodus by Richard Hess in Egyptian Religious Influences on the Early Hebrews. Okay, most of the names come from both the first and second millennium BC, and so first millennium BC was 1000 BC up to 0 AD, and then the second millennium BC was 2000 BC to 1000 BC, and then the Exodus was probably in the mid 1200s BC. Okay, so most names come from both the first and second millennium BC, a few from the second millennium BC alone, but none of these names come from the first millennium BC alone. So if this is just a later fabrication, why are none of the names just from that one millennium and not in the previous one? Many, such as Moses and Miriam, have likely Egyptian but possible Hebrew origins. I think it comes from the word merit, which means to draw up. In fact, if you look at the book of Exodus, it even says they called him Moses because they drew him out of the water, or the Pharaoh's daughter drew him out of the water, not Pharaoh's wife, as a certain movie portrays it. Nonetheless, I do like that movie, Prince of Egypt. I still like it. Got that wrong, though. And so, some names, such as Korah, Phineas, and Hophni, have definite Egyptian origins. I think Hophni means the tadpole. I don't remember what Phineas means, but I think Korah means the bald head, and the author of this article notes that I think Korah was one of the people who rebelled against Moses. And Korah meaning bald head, in Egyptian practice, I think minor clergy had bald heads, so it is possible, although not proven, that Korah had one of these positions back in Egypt, and he thought, because of his, I guess you could say, his previous experience, or his previous position, he deserved to have a position like the Levites or something, which apparently he didn't get. So that's just a interesting note there. Okay, and now we're going to talk a little bit about loan words from Egyptian to Hebrew. Now, in Exodus through Numbers, 1.172% of the total lexemes, I guess, which is like a root word, I think, and 0.591% of the total words are of Egyptian origins. In Exodus, it is 1.864% and 1.391%. So 1.864% of all lexemes have Egyptian origins, and 1.391% of all words have Egyptian origins. In the remainder of the Bible, it is 0.635% and 0.122%. So there's a lot less, a lot smaller percentage of Egyptian loan words in the rest of the Bible, but it figures that in the part of the Bible that describes their captivity and escape from Egypt, there would be a lot more Egyptian loaned words.
True, and it sounds like it's 3 times as many.
Yeah, thereabouts. Now, there's a similar case study in Ezra and Nehemiah. 1.455% of the total lexemes and 0.448% of the total words are from Old Iranian. So there are 51 Hebrew let me go back on that a little. So I guess in Ezra and Nehemiah, that describes their time spent in Persia. So there would be a considerable amount of Persian loan words, and I don't think anybody doubts that they were in Persia at the time. I could be wrong about that. But it makes sense that from a time when they were in Persia, there's a lot of Persian loanwords. So from a time when they were in Egypt, there'd be a lot of Egyptian loanwords. Now there are 51 Hebrew loanwords from Egyptian. Ugaritic, which is another ancient Near Eastern language, has 4. Phoenician has 1. Old Akkadian has 2. Moabite, Ammonite, and and Edomite have none. Imperial Aramaic has 44. There are 483 total occurrences of these words in Imperial Aramaic texts, and 186 of those are from documents that came from Egypt, which had instances of all 44 words. The remaining 297 words were only 2 words that together appeared that many times. So someone could make the argument that, well, ancient Hebrew has a lot of Egyptian loan words, but, they were in close proximity to Egypt. That's probably why. Well, if you look at all the other languages, or many of the other languages that were in close proximity to ancient Egypt, they don't have that level of influence. Now, none of the 8 feminine loan words end with I, which would have put them in the first millennium BC. So, in certain languages, and I guess Hebrew might be one of them, Spanish is one, German is one, French is one, some words have like a masculine or feminine sense, and so I guess 8 of those 51 Hebrew loaned words from Egyptian to Hebrew were a feminine tense, I guess you would say, to them. And so the author of this study, whose name was Benjamin Noonan, noted that they don't end with I, and he was able to trace an ending with I to the first millennium BC, which I talked about earlier, would have made them a recent fabrication, made them recent. So these are apparently older than their captivity in Babylon. And this is from a study called Egyptian Loan Words as Evidence for the Authenticity of the Exodus and Wilderness Tradition by Benjamin J. Noonan. He is not the first person to do a study like this. I've even read through a study from the 1950s that did something like this. Now let's talk a little bit about archaeology. Now, Ramesses was the capital of Egypt during the time of Ramses II, who I would say, and many others would say, was the pharaoh of Egypt at the time of the Exodus, although there is some disagreement, which I could talk about in another video. So quick travel between the Hebrews and the pharaoh makes sense since it was right next to the city of Avaris. Now let's talk a little bit more about that. Avaris was at one point the capital of the Hyksos, who were a Semitic people who ruled Egypt, likely starting around the 1600s BC, and it wasn't too long before they were thrown out of there. But anyone who believes in a biblical exodus says the Hebrews were in Avaris. And Avaris is just a few kilometers away from Ramesses. There's archaeological projects being done there. They found a lot of Semitic stuff there. So Avaris was captured in the 1500s BC, and captives were taken. And I think that was about a little after the time when the Hyksos were cast out of Egypt. They were driven out, and that being their capital, that was, I guess, you could say a Hyksos holdout, a Semitic holdout in Egypt. It would have been viewed as a foreign city on Egyptian territory, and that it needed to be subjugated. And there is a letter from a general, I believe his name was Amhosa, and the pharaoh at that time, I believe, had the same name. And he mentions the siege and eventual victory in that siege and subjugation of that city, and captives being taken. So I would say that is about, it was like the 1530s BC. So I would say that is, indirect evidence of the enslavement of the Hebrews beginning at around that time. I mean, of course, it doesn't mention the Hebrews specifically, but, a Semitic people in that same area, captives being taken, people being enslaved, fits together. So now we can talk a little bit about some other historical documentation for the Exodus. Now, Manetho and Tacitus were historians, and Manetho was an Egyptian historian who lived, I believe, in the 3rd or 4th century BC, and Tacitus was a Roman historian who lived in the 1st century AD. and they both describe a disease that fell upon the Egyptians due to the Hebrews that caused them and had to be kicked out. So, in Against Apion, Josephus, who was a Jewish historian of the 1st century, records that what a number of historians had to say about the Exodus. Now, we don't have any existing writings of Manetho except as is recorded by other historians such as Josephus. So, according to Manetho, according to Josephus, the pharaoh whose son was called Ramesses. I think he was called, I think he had a different name, but the pharaoh's son was called Ramesses, rounded up a bunch of lepers and others disfigured by sickness for labor in the mines, but eventually he gave them the city of Avaris. There, a priest called Osarseph changed his name to Moses and rebelled against the pharaoh and the Egyptian religion. They invited people from Jerusalem, and he refers to them, I believe, as the shepherd kings, and it seems to make sense that these people they're inviting are the Hyksos, or at least their descendants. They invited people from Jerusalem to help make war on Egypt, but they were defeated and driven out as far as Syria. And so, Lysimachus tells a similar story that is much shorter. He says that the same class of people, like I guess lepers or other severely ill or deformed people, if you will, were expelled from Egypt. But he says Moses became their leader in the desert and led them to destroy many religious edifices in the area. So I think Tacitus says that most historians of the day, which was the 1st century AD, would accept that the Hebrews were expelled out of Egypt due to some sort of plague being associated with them. And I think Tacitus tells the story that Lysimachus tells. That's the story he tells. I think the name of the pharaoh in that story was... I actually can't remember the name of the pharaoh in that story, but if you read anything by Tacitus, I think it's his History Book 5, and then in Josephus Against Apion, you'll find these stories as well as many others recorded.
When did the Exodus actually occur?
I would say that was probably in the 1200s BC, and it's around that time that you would see that Avaris is made into a graveyard, and so it's not really being lived in, it's being used as a graveyard, but Ramesses is still inhabited. In fact, I think Ramesses II's firstborn son died in the mid-1200s.
Okay.
And so it was not his firstborn son who became the pharaoh after him. It was another son named, I think, Merneptah. And it was actually during the reign of Merneptah that we have the first extra-biblical reference to the nation of Israel. Israel is laid waste, his seed is no more. It says that on some Egyptian monument.
Okay. And that's on an Egyptian monument?
Yes, from the pharaoh after Ramesses II. So it could not have been after that time.
Okay. And so this was of the Jews who were leaving Egypt
yes,
and traveling to their promised land, which was
what is now Israel.
Okay. Okay. And that's what is now modern day Israel.
Yes.
Okay. So that is the tie or the connection for the Jews to that particular part of the world.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, Nelson, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Yeah.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
That was awesome. So I hope everyone got some useful information from that. Once again, that was Nelson Bopp with his presentation on the Exodus. So with that, we're going to call it a night. We do Bible study every Friday night at 6 o'clock New Mexico time, and we encourage you to join in. If you have any questions, leave them in comments. I'll be happy to answer them. And if this is a video that you liked, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and share it out with your friends and family members, and consider subscribing. And with that, on behalf of Nelson, I want to say thank you very much, and I hope you have a great evening, and God bless you all.
Thank you.